change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast. I am Nathan Chappell. Today I am joined by someone that is larger than life, someone that I have just tremendous respect for, someone that I was fortunate enough to meet, I think at the launch or just before the launch of my first book, The Generosity Crisis. Today I'm joined by Michael Sheldrick, who among other things is the author of the book that's right behind him in this, Always, Anywhere He Travels Over the World, From Ideas to Impact. And he'll tell the origin story, a founder or a partner of Global Citizen, which has just done and continues to do amazing work all over the world. And so, Mick, I don't know why this has taken 5 years, for us to actually record this podcast, but I'm so excited to have you here today and for people in our audience to get to know you a little bit.
No, well, thanks for having me. I think we were speaking and you said, we should catch up. You should come on the podcast. And I was like, yeah, we've never actually done that before. So here I am, really delighted to be here and also to catch up as well. But really, really grateful for all the support. I remember when we met when you were writing your book, and I learned a lot from your book tour, what you guys were all doing. And it was off the back of that I had the opportunity to write my own. And so, yeah, really appreciate both the friendship, many years of this journey, and hopefully helping some great organizations achieve even greater impact in the world along the way.
Right on brand for you. So for those that don't know you, again, you're someone that I would consider, I'm so fortunate to consider you a friend. I mean, I have your cell phone number and I can bug you occasionally, but you're a person that is kind of larger than life. And you run in these circles, literally, like right before we started recording, we just got back from got back from Brazil. You're going to Brazil and then you're going to Australia.
I just got back last week. We, at Global Citizen, the organization I co-founded, we just produced our first ever event in Latin America, which took place in the Amazon, helped to mobilize $1 billion in pledges for some incredible organizations down there. And just got back here a few days before heading to South Africa. And then we'll be back in Australia with my parents for all of December. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and it was something I promised to my parents, given we decided to move literally on the other side of the world from them.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how you do it. I travel a lot and I look at you and you're crossing, going to the other side of the world continuously. I would just have like dark circles under my eyes. You know, what's interesting? I was just going back to your book, which I have right here. And one of the things I just thought that was adorable, because you mentioned your daughter, and not only adorable, but interesting, actually, where you actually dedicate your book both to your daughter. And I think this is probably so much of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like your work, the work that you have to truly solve some of humanity's largest problems, is driven by something that's even beyond you, something that you were raised to do, but something like you speak for your daughter. It says, for my daughter, whose generation our actions will shape. And so the juxtaposition of this, though, is that the second transcription is, and to my grandma, Joyce Grace, who is always advised to focus on the present and not to worry about the things we cannot change. I thought those were just like almost this juxtaposition of these two things of like, focus on the future, but also stay present. How much of that guides your kind of ethos in what you do? Because most people would say the things that you're trying to change can't be changed, yet you take an approach of like, we must change them, and maybe that's for the next generations.
So my grandma, she's 91 years old and she's still with us and still incredible. What she actually used to say to me was a little bit darker than what I write in the dedication. If I was worried, and we might worry about whatever thing happens in the world, at the playground, at school, but she would say, Michael, stop worrying. You die if you worry, you die if you don't. So why worry at all?
Yeah.
And the implication from that, this message of, hey, you wake up each day, You have choices. Don't worry about all the stuff that you can't control. Focus on what you can do. And it's mirrored in a way by Jane Goodall, who was kind enough to provide a blurb for the
Hmm.
book and who obviously just recently passed away. And I think she was a similar age to my grandma. But she used to say something similar. Each day you wake up, you have choices to make, and your actions, however big or small, do impact those around you. And there is something about that. Whenever I'm worrying about what is happening to me or what's happening in the world or how actions make me feel, I'm like, well, let me focus on what I can control, not what I can't change beyond that, but what can I do in this moment? And it becomes actually incredibly empowering.
Hmm.
But it also, especially right now, I think it's important to just try sometimes to remove some of the anger, the angst that might be clouding our judgment and get us to think down and say, okay, well, how can we actually create impact and live a meaningful life?
Yeah, that's amazing. I reflect on growing up. My grandfather, who's a PhD geologist, who wrote a book called Crisis by Consent in 1971, and he was very
Wow.
concerned about the future of the world and from an environmental perspective. And his biggest concern actually wasn't people doing harm to the planet. It was those that didn't take the time to think about their impact. And so the entire book is really about apathy. And it was more of the concern of that someone goes to bed at night, not even thinking that they should or could do something. So for some reason, you were either brought up with this kind of, I don't know, over designed sense of solving problems and big problems. And tell me, how did that manifest in you? I mean, was that just a very young age of like, Mick, you're built to do something great and, just take every day and apply it to these? Because the things that you've done are so much larger than life for, I mean, the Jane Goodall size types of things that are just absolutely amazing.
So I think it really goes back to high school. I'll be honest, Nathan. When I was growing up, I was that kid who wasn't good at many things. I couldn't kick a football in a straight line to save my life. I was the most uncoordinated kid when it came to sports, which as an Australian is kind of blasphemy to admit. Academically, I remember my teacher, first year of high school, telling my mom, Michael is bottom of the class. He's not even going to get the grades to graduate successfully from high school, let alone get into university. And because of that, because I had people saying, oh, you're stupid, you're lazy, you're a loser, you're not going to amount to much, I had zero ambition
Mm.
or aspiration. And one day, in the middle of that first year at high school, I had this teacher, he was 24 years old. It was his first teaching gig out of university. He just pulled me aside and he said, I think there's more to you than meets the eye. And it was the first time someone had seriously sat me down and said, you may not believe in yourself, but I believe in you. You've got so much more to give. And if you're willing to sit with me during recesses, lunch, after school, I will dedicate time one on one with you to help you improve. And he said, I think if you put in the work and I also commit, I put skin in the game, I think there's no reason why you can't be the number one kid in the class by the end of the year. And I remember that moment when someone believes in you and says
Mm.
that. I remember thinking, wow, you're right. I don't believe in myself. But heck, I'll give it a go if you're willing to take a bet on me. And sure enough, 6 months later, last day of high school, second last day of high school, rather, there I was sat on my lounge suite, looking out the driveway, and this car drives by, and out pops this teacher, Mr. Byrne was his name. And I run out, and I'm like, what's going on? Why are you here? And he goes, well, I was crunching the numbers, and I kind of knew where you lived on the way home from school, and I couldn't wait until tomorrow to give this to you. Well done, mate. And he gave me a certificate with a number one on it.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the first time I was like, wow, okay, this actually works. You're in the work, someone helps you. And so 4 years later, ended up being able to graduate high school, got the grades to study anything I want, got into law school. And suddenly people were telling me, wow, Michael, you're really smart, you're intelligent, you can do anything. And I remembered thinking, no, that's not true. I remembered the moment the start of high school how I felt, and I remembered the difference that teacher made, and it really did feel like a fork in the road moment. And I remember having this sense of gratitude for the opportunities I had. And as I got into university and learnt about the inequities in the world, the injustices,
Mm,
I just felt this profound sense of desire to do something because I was so grateful that, my potential, realized my potential was only possible because I had access to that great teacher. And whether it was the kind of stupid poverty that means a child dies because they lack access to a 13-cent vaccine, or because they don't have a school, let alone a teacher, they're not able to fulfill their potential. I felt I want to do something about it. And that was really what set me off in this charitable world, I guess, initially. And it turned on the few superpowers I did have. I've spoken about sport, spoken about academia, but one of my few superpowers turned out was being able to ask people to give stuff away online in
that's great.
return. And my very first campaign at my old high school, I arranged a quiz night and I went around the local shopping mall and I asked everyone to just donate stuff, McDonald's, the equivalent of Starbucks. And we did this quiz night and we raised about $1,000 that we donated to help build a school in Papua New Guinea. So that was my first fundraising campaign, and that's where it started.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, one love letter to every teacher out there, right? Who thinks that this is a thankless job and, they don't make a difference. I mean, to think about that fork in the road and that path that you took and the millions of people that that have benefited from the hard work. And I can say this about you. You're a person that obviously you're smart, but you're tenacious. Like you have like this Energizer Bunny kind of way about you that you just go, but also you're just so good at bringing people together. And so, and the last part, I think when I look at you, I see someone that's fearless because you go into meet with dictators or parliament or whatever government officials from like every country in the world. And you're just there shaking hands and you're sharing ideas and you're talking about how, together we need to move from ideas to impact. And that's been such an incredible theme. And I think a lot of people who, if they feel that they don't have enough or they're not enough, I don't know. Is that something that you're aware of or you just don't know any other way?
So I think two things. When I was writing this book, From Ideas to Impact, and I should say it's not necessarily a story about global citizen. I designed it more as a playbook for people who were feeling that sense of apathy, questioning if their actions can make a difference. And it was really distilled, I guess, 8 lessons or principles from some of the incredible people I've had the opportunity to meet and work with over the years, sort of saying, hey, well, why have you been so successful? And putting this out there. And 2 lessons that really struck me that go to what your question was about was firstly, people say, well, can anyone make a difference? And I think we are all live in different parts of society. We have different levels of wealth, we have different levels of connection. But one of the things that really struck me about those who stood out, who had been able to make a difference, whether it was in townships in Johannesburg, South Africa, whether it was communities in Caribbean nations hit by severe hurricanes, whether it was coal workers looking at how they rejuvenate their community in a post-coal society, it was about how to ask for help. And it was recognizing they were very good at identifying what they needed help with and then putting that ask out there. And there is an art to it, like how you ask for help. But that to me, and it seems maybe a little bit contradictory. You say you empower people. How? One of the things is knowing how to ask for help, ask for support. But it just struck me if we can get more people to recognize that there's no shame in asking for help, that there's a way in which you can reach out if you're specific, that you will get a lot of no's. Like 9 out of 10 people will say no, and you might even be surprised by those who you thought were in your corner who later let you down. But at the same time, you will find those yeses as well. And more often than not, you might be surprised by those who you thought wouldn't be in your corner, but responded because people are waiting to support. People want to be asked. And if you can go to them and say, hey, this is something you've got, this is how you can help me, then there's many people who will react to that. And there's so many incredible stories that I try and document in the book that goes to that principle. And I guess the second insight that sort of struck me is amongst everyone I asked, there was one common ingredient, the lowest common denominator, if you like, that they all said was core to their success at brokering change, improving their lives. And it was this notion that creating change requires engaging, talking, and interacting with people, ideas, and institutions that you may not always like or agree. And that, especially now in our society where we have so much tribalism, so much pressure to conform to what we think our peers want us to do, that more than anything else really struck me. And that's what's really resonated with people around the world and what I think we need more of right now.
That's amazing. And before we talk about AI, because you and I have actually co-authored a thought leadership piece kind of before AI was super cool, where people didn't really know what the application of it was in the social sector. But tell us a little bit about the origin story about Global Citizen and what it does, because not everyone, has that basis. And then I want to kind of move from there to your work. It does this amazing thing into this advocacy and the policy side, because you've talked about it's great to have ideas. You have to take agency to do something with those ideas, but to actually enact lots of change, there's enough money in the world, but you need policies that are aligned to actually make substantive change. So I don't know if you could pull those two threads together, that'd be great.
So I mentioned that my first campaign or first involvement was fundraising, right? And those quiz nights soon became movie nights. We were raising thousands of dollars. In Australia, we call them sausage sizzles instead of barbecues. We was raising all this money, we was donating it, was building schools. And in my university breaks, I had the opportunity to go and volunteer or travel and work in India and in Bangladesh and Timor-Leste, just north of Australia. And on the one hand, you'd be going, you'd be seeing these products, these schools, and you'd be like, wow, we helped raise money that helped contribute to that, real bricks and mortars. On the other hand, you would just see the need. You would say, well, okay, it's one thing to build the school, but who is paying the teacher's salary 365 days a year? Who's paying for the meals at lunchtime when for many children that go to these schools, that meal might be the only healthy, consistent meal they get every day? And then if a child or a member of their parent or teacher gets sick, where's the health system who's going to look after them? And when you amplify that across all the communities in need, you quickly realize, my God, no amount of gala night charity dinners, however successful, can raise the billions needed to end extreme poverty. Systemic challenges require systemic solutions. And it was at that point during my time at university where I met the other co-founders of what would become Global Citizen. And we were grappling with this question, well, how do we scale this? How do we get millions of citizens involved, addressing these systemic challenges? And at the time, social media was just emerging. Today we talk about AI. You go to all the conferences in Geneva, AI for good. If you remember 15 years ago, that was the conversation on social media. It was kind of pre-Arab Spring. People were saying, is AI going to be for good? AI for sustainable development, AI for bad. Like that was the topic that was on everyone's mind when you went to these technology conferences. And so what we did is we developed an app where people could learn about the issues, but they also learned how they could use their voice, whether it was right into their local elected officials saying, hey, we need better policies that currently keep people living in poverty. We need to invest in eradicating diseases like polio. The only challenge with this app, and the functionality was brilliant, was everyone else was doing the same at the same time. So how did we cut through the noise? And that's where a gentleman by the name of Ryan Gould in California, he had this idea of combining it with popular culture and music. So I spoke before about asking for help or leveraging the strengths of others. He essentially said, why don't you throw some concerts? And instead of charging people for the tickets and raising money that way, you get people to download your app. they take action. And in taking these actions, whether it's calling on governments to act, whether it's volunteering their time, whatever it is, taking quizzes, learning about the issues, whatever it is, and taking action, they accrue points and they can trade in those points to earn a ticket to the concert. And so we started doing that. We started small with Australian artists, and then John Legend, we convinced John Legend to fly all the way to Australia. He spent more time flying than he was on the ground, and that was in October 2011. And 9 months after that, people got wind of it in America. They said, this is a cool idea. And in September 2012, my final year of university, I found myself standing on the great lawn of Central Park with the likes of Neil Young, the Foo Fighters, and 60,000 other people for what would become the first Global Citizen Festival. And that was almost 15 years ago. And here we are, more than 40 million citizen actions later, more than $49 billion that's helped been distributed, that's helped led to a billion life-saving interventions. And all of that's been achieved with some incredible partners and partnerships along the way. And yeah, the rest was history, I suppose.
It's an incredible history. And for people that don't know, need to go, of course, we'll put the link to Global Citizen. I have a Global Citizen shirt that I wore actually the night of my book launch when we were in New York. Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing, I don't know, it's an amazing idea coming from like an unsuspecting place. I mean, of course, like Live Aid was this like one thing that just kind of like came and went and happened, and it wasn't easy to get going, but you just continued on this incredible legacy. And, I continue to follow you, and, it's like Global Citizen here and there. And it's just like the number of people that are behind that leave those events with a new sense of, well, what's going on and responsibility, ideally, and the ability to take action, because you do make it, very practical, and you model that.
Richard, I was going to say Richard Curtis, who in America is most well known as directing Love Actually. But in the UK, he was kind of lauded for creating Red Nose Day and was involved in all of those efforts in the 80s, such as Live Aid. Because I think my parents were both British, right? And growing up, you heard about them. And I think we always acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And there was a number of those concerts, the concert for Bangladesh at Madison Square Garden, George Harrison, it was Live Aid, there was a whole bunch of other significant events like that. But what Richard said, the next evolution that we really embraced at Global Citizen, is he said, it was one thing to build a one-off event with Live Aid that raised millions of dollars in a single day or 24-hour period. But if you could turn that into an ongoing movement, not just an organization, but a movement that ran 365 days a year. And then the festival just becomes like a lightning rod, a moment to celebrate the progress, give people a reward, those who have taken action, and also a moment of accountability to report back and be transparent. But he said that was the evolution actually building this. So, but yeah, I mean, some incredible initiatives leveraging the power of music to fundraise and have an impact.
Yeah, that's an incredible legacy. And I know you're not done. So you've still got probably a lot of miles in you. And honestly, just the energy and the drive to continue to push for equity and better solutions for humanity. I'm curious now, moving, because, obviously our audience, and we just had our global summit with 11,000 people from 130 countries. They're looking at their own organizations and missions to amplify impact. And, we see at the same time where we see issues not becoming less in many cases, and a lot of cases becoming harder, more complicated, we see a technology that can seemingly allow us to rethink what was possible before. How are you kind of reconciling with that? Are you, in terms of, AI to solve some of these challenges, are you seeing it become a fundamental change maker in what was possible before to what's possible now? Or do you see it contributing to some of these issues and wrestle with that? Because I get a lot of questions around AI and the impact on the environment. I'm so very aware of that. And you do a lot of environmental work as well.
So I think, let me talk about it in two frames. First, from an operational standpoint, and then from a kind of broader how it impacts our mission to end extreme poverty. Because at Global Citizen, we say action taken is our currency, right? That's our bread and butter. People download the app, they take action, they get on the platform. And it was really interesting. The traditional process for creating these actions was kind of clunky. You had to train people, you had to go on the back end. I was reflecting back to one of our first Global Citizen festivals and second one, 2013, when we had Stevie Wonder. I think it took me a whole 2 weeks to design 8 actions. And that was all I could create was 8 actions in the time I had. I had to write the copy, update it. This was when our team was really small, right? And what happened as we grew as an organization, you would hire these incredible, capable people who could design and build these actions, but they still became bottlenecks because, they would have sponsors and partners saying, hey, can we build this action together? We would have partner NGOs. We never like saying no, right? And we like being a platform for others. That means you get hit with all of this requests. And so we would be building all of these actions. And really, the limitation was the number of hours in a day. That there was only so much copy, only so much actions that any single person could design. And of course, as we scaled, you could hire more people, but you still had these natural limitations. What AI allowed us to do this year, as we launched this year's Global Citizen Festival campaign in the summer, is we actually developed our own agent for design and actions, and we actually empowered our whole team in how to use it. And what we did is made sure that the agent was trained in our language, made sure that it was trained from an editorial perspective, because we have a tone, we're positive, we're solution orientated. So we made sure that it matched the tone. And then we basically made sure it had an awareness of all the different types of actions, whether it's register to volunteer, to plant a tree, whether it's create a quiz, whether it's sign this petition. But it really empowered our whole organization to say, hey, let's create the actions yourself and let's throw it in there. Now, of course, you still need a final human check, quality control, but it was surprisingly good. And for most of our team, the back end, creating this can sometimes seem opaque. The comments were, wow, this is empowering, this is inspiring. And what it also allowed us to meet was the need of global citizens and the desire of global citizens to take action. Because we got to a point where if you had 50 actions on the platform, our highest engaged citizens would take all the actions, right? You can
Right.
never have enough actions. And what was really interesting is the individuals who were previously they were the sole people who created those actions. I had a conversation with them because I could sense the anxiety. They were like, I've given up control.
Right.
I'm now giving this to every other staff member in the organization. And this was something that I had. It was a unique skill set because I knew how to write the copy in a certain way. I knew how to operate the back end. And I said, don't look at it like that. Look at yourself now as a facilitator. You're training everyone else. Look at now how you can multiply the impact. Look at all of those global citizens. I said, you used to come to me and say you need to hire more people because we can't keep up at demand. So now we can achieve that. And when we framed it in that way, it became incredibly empowering as well. And then they started to see, well, what more can we do? How can we multiply the impact? So that was just one example in terms of how it shaped our approach to design and actions for our global citizens. Now, there's a bunch of other examples out there that many of the nonprofits you work with, from proposal writing, fundraising, that I could go into. But to your point on the mission, our job at Global Citizen is ultimately to focus on policies that will end extreme poverty. And whilst there's no silver bullet to eradicating extreme poverty, arguably the closest is creating jobs, right? Because it's jobs that give people a roadmap out of extreme poverty. It's jobs that give people that ongoing income. So they can afford education, water, food, everything else, healthcare. Now, already, if you just remove AI from the equation, we have a big challenge over the next decade, where in many parts of the world, because you've had this big explosion of population, parts of Africa and India, there's 1.2 billion young people who will be entering the job market globally in the next decade. And currently, there's only forecast to be about 400 million jobs for all of those people. So the challenge, public policy challenge is, where are these 800 million jobs going to come from? And if we don't meet this need, is this going to result in higher levels of migration? Is it going to result in higher levels of instability, of conflict, of poverty, of food insecurity? So there's all these reasons why we should care. Now, where AI comes in is that's already a big challenge. Where AI comes in is people say, well, okay, the traditional industries that you could rely on to create those jobs, like manufacturing, like agriculture, like mining, are going to be disrupted because of AI. And so those industries might create less jobs as a result. And so where are the jobs going to come from? And so from our standpoint, what we're trying to think through is, well, what are those industries that are not just resilient, but which could actually work together with AI in order to create those jobs with the right investment and the frameworks? Obviously, Bill Gates talks about healthcare and medical research and pharmaceuticals. He talks about energy because of AI, energy demand has gone through the roof. And then he also talks obviously about network engineering and coding, right? We believe there's also another big opportunity, and that's the power of music in the live events industry and tourism, because we believe people with more time on their hand, they'll be traveling more, they want to see events. And we think there's a huge opportunity. And so we now see music not just as a way to advocate and raise funds, but we actually see music itself as a way to create jobs and perhaps be one of these industries where it could be one of the big job creators of the next few decades, providing you have the right policies in place. And obviously a big one is the relationship with music, AI, and copyright and
Yeah.
intellectual property. But this is one of the exciting areas that we're entering in terms of policies we're advocating around.
Yeah, house is so interesting. Think about, I was just reading this week the number of gigafactories that are being built for robots, essentially. And I'm not talking next year, but within 10 years. To be honest, it's a lot of the impact will be in white collar routine jobs. Like, I mean, I think in the US or developed nations probably will be hit the hardest because people of means will buy the robots that will displace the person that was doing the thing. Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing to think about it in less developed nations and where those opportunities either will be additive or those challenges will grow. All said, I think about organizations that are leaning into AI to think about, solving for whatever their core mission is. There are new disruptive ways to do that, you're not just subject to all of these things happening to you, but we are very present and we need to leverage the technology that, can help us reimagine what our organizations are meant to do to begin with. And it sounds like you're already doing that. In fact, some of the AI music actually is pretty interesting, to be honest. I don't know how much you've played with it, but it's actually kind of fascinating. And artists
It,
have taken such a polarized view on whether it's either helpful for them and helping them, create something different, or they just want to reject it entirely. So,
well, and it's funny. So the new edition of From Ideas to Impact, which is now out by the time your listeners listen to this and available, I actually include a new chapter specifically on this question and the relationship with music, AI, and some of these questions that come up. But look, I mean, the one thing I would just say on that is music, like anything, I mean, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Music has often been influenced by other people, other forms of music for centuries. And in parts of the world, there are great musicians who, because they can't get their music licensed or don't know how to, they find that other people are using their music and not paying them for it. And
right,
that's even
right.
before you have AI come into the equation. So, in some respects, this question could actually force policymakers to actually grapple with a conundrum that's always existed, and it's
Hmm.
where you grapple with what constitutes original music, right? And what is fair use if you use someone else's content to create that? because maybe you do have some great songs and you have some great artists and it's empowering and they're able to use AI in a way that frees them up in a way that they wouldn't have been able to create music because they couldn't afford an editor, they couldn't afford,
Right.
a sound studio in the past, right? So in that sense, it could be empowering. So if we can grapple with these questions, I mean, we shouldn't forget the fact that something like 50 countries on the planet don't even have any copyright frameworks or
Right.
laws on the books, right? So this could actually force resolution to many of these questions and could actually give artists who never had the opportunity to earn an income from their work the opportunity to do so.
I absolutely think that will be the case. I mean, I expect humanity to go through almost a renaissance of creativity based on all of the people that were maybe they just didn't have those opportunities. Maybe it's because they had to work 18-hour days to like do the thing, but the inside they are an artist. And whether it be music or digital art or other things, I'm finding people are being able to express themselves. And I've spent some time in Las Vegas at a Gen AI conference with a bunch of artists from around the world. And these are not your typical people that they grew up, they knew they always wanted to be an artist. There was just something about it inside them, but life took a different path. But now they've been able to open their horizons and to do things and express themselves. And with that, it's interesting because all of my undergrad electives, I took art history actually. I don't know why. Other than it was actually because the professor was fascinating. I took one course as like take this elective. And after that, he was so engaging and he talked about his PhD. He had actually gone back to the two things that all of humanity has had in common, the two things that since the beginning of time and hieroglyphics was essentially art. And in many cases, that was through body art and music. That every
Wow.
generation across all spans and every place on planet have those two things in common with one another. So there is something magical about music bringing people together because it's inherent and built within us, and it draws us all the way back to our very kind of primal instincts.
But I'm glad you mentioned universities. Incidentally, one of the most fascinating courses I did was a random course. I had to make credits, and it was called Science Fiction in History, History in Science Fiction, and some fantasy in there as well. And the professor was amazing, talking about the fact that if you want to get a sense of where we're going, he said, if you go back to the 1940s, which was an interesting point, you look at the fact Lord of the Rings became one of the most widely read books of all time that decade. He said, doesn't it mean something if you really want to understand the way people felt in the 1940s? You have to understand the world in which hundreds of millions of people chose to escape to.
Right.
And that is
Yeah.
an interesting point. But the reason why I thought it was interesting you raised that is all of this on AI policy, what we do, job creation. I mean, it does force into, I guess, question what is the role of education? What is the role of learning? What is the role of universities? And how do they evolve to unleash that renaissance you were talking about? I mean, the World Economic Forum, they produced, it's part of their job skills report every year. They talk about the types of attributes that's needed, creativity. Mark Cuban talks about adaptability, about curiosity, about resilience, and these kind of skills. And you could argue that universities, some people have criticized them, and I never like generalizing because I know there's
Hmm.
so many universities in the world, but they say, well, universities traditionally focused on technical learning or rote learning or getting people to think in terms of certainty when we're going through these periods where we're going to be living in constant flux. So, how do you get people comfortable? Not just comfortable, but being able to feel like they can thrive in a world of uncertainty and constant churn. And so that is one of the big questions out there that I'm in a lot of my writing recently. I've been both speaking to employers of graduates and also universities to figure that out. Well, what needs to happen in the way we teach people if we're going to lead to this change? Because what employers will tell you is where they're starting to see the impact right now isn't in existing hiring
Right.
or workforce dimensions. It's actually in less roles available for grads, right? Coming
Right.
out of universities, and universities will tell you that they're seeing difficulties in grads getting jobs, right? And so there's a mismatch that's going on there.
Yeah, I get this all the time. In fact, this weekend I was in Chicago and someone asked after I did a keynote, my child's going to school, going to be going off to college, what should they study? And when I was in Geneva last year, Jeffrey Hinton was there being interviewed by Nick Thompson from The Atlantic, and he asked him the same question. And it's like, one, make sure that you study something that is related to the humanities and understanding the connection between people and things, because kind of that routine technical learning by itself is, especially in areas that it's easily replicated. So like programming, which AI, only 3 or 4 years ago was like the path. If you want to make a ton of money, just, learn how to code. And now 50% unemployment for graduates that are coders essentially on their own. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating time where we can go back to not just doing the safe thing, but doing the thing that will be additive and the thing that is probably my encouragement, do something that will bring you joy, first of all.
Yeah.
And don't worry about the safe thing. But mixing humanities in with even technical skill, I think, has just never been more important into this next phase.
Well, here we are. I studied science fiction and history. You studied art history, and here we
Right.
are talking about fundraising and nonprofits
And the
and how
future of
to exactly.
Well, so I know you're not done. We'll wrap up. The paperback version's coming out, which is amazing. So it probably means they ran out of all the hardback version, and now you're off to that. And you wrote another chapter. I don't know how you find the time. What's next for you, Mick, in terms of like, again, I look at you as someone who you're like the Energizer Bunny, but you're so passionate about your work. I can't see you slowing down. What's next for you and your work in the next, say, 12, 24 months?
I think first of all, the book tour's been amazing. I mean, like you go around, and I made a conscious decision. I said, if I rock up at an event and there's two people at an event, I will give the same passion and degree of attention than if it was a hall of 500 people. And getting the feedback from people has been incredible as an author, as you appreciate. And I think the thing right now that I really fear is people believing that their actions can't make a difference. And we spoke before about apathy. I do think we're living in this sea of apathy where most age groups, when you look at the statistics, when they're asked a question, do you think your actions can make a difference? They say no. And the worst thing about that is it tricks us into this slow circle down the abyss towards fatalism, where basically it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Right.
And the truth is right now, I believe if you ever wanted to live a profoundly meaningful life, we actually have more tools, more ability than any previous generation in the history of humanity to impact the lives of others, regardless of who you are and where you live in the world. And in that respect, the book was never meant to be comprehensive. It was never meant to be an answer to everything, but it did aim to give people a place to start. Because I think if you can get people on that journey, seeing the actions that they take, the momentum from that, and the conversations they have with other people, the research all shows the best way to instill a bias for action in others is to tell your close friends and family about something you've just done, some action, some impact. And so with that, I hope it triggers people to start their own journeys. One of my favorite quotes when I was writing the book was from Eleanor Roosevelt, who famously said, "The way to begin is to begin." And I hope it
Mm-hmm.
recognizes that there's a lot we can do ourselves. And that's why on the Global Citizen Front, we're looking to grow our community from 12.5 million citizens to 50 million citizens.
Wow.
And we're seeing a lot of engagement just back from Brazil, which was incredible. In Africa, we're hoping to build this Africa's first international touring circuit. So that's been incredibly exciting as well. And then in addition to that, I've been partnering with my wife on a number of these issues, which I came across, whether it was writing the book or over the last few years. But one of them was around working with universities, working with employers on how we address the learning models right now, because I think it could be an incredible opportunity. And these universities could be anywhere in the world. They don't have to be the best, the top. But what I'm saying is there's a real opportunity for some dynamic universities disrupt the system, but to become the pilots, the trailblazers, to usher in that period of renaissance that you referred to. And maybe that's using AI, maybe that's using small language models with the best professors out there, together with a form of peer-to-peer project-based learning. I don't know, but that to me is really exciting, so that we can address that bigger challenge that I mentioned before of how we not just give people the skills they need to enter the workforce of the future, but also to build their own enterprises and to thrive. Because I think that's what will help end extreme poverty and address many of the issues that you mentioned, from climate change through to our energy systems and all of the other challenges that we face around the world.
Well, what a great place to leave it. I mean, I think a glimpse into the mind of Mick Sheldrick of anything is possible. I think you've taken the idea that one is not enough just to have an idea, but to actually do something and to take action. And I think layering that on in this world, while there are a lot of challenges and those challenges seem insurmountable, we're also faced at a time where what the constraints were of the past, the limitations of the past, may not be the same limitations. There are opportunities to rethink everything we think we know we can do. And so thank you for all you do to embrace this idea of impact, to challenge people to take action. I see you as a proud new parent, and I reflect on this moment as my kids are older, that I don't think there's ever been a more important time to be a parent. And what I mean by that is to model what it means to be a good citizen. And so you play this very important role personally, but also from a much larger societal kind of perspective. So I want to encourage people to do that, lean in, pour into the future leaders of our world, because essentially they'll have to make decisions that will impact the future at a blazing speed. So thank you for all you do, Mick. Thanks for taking the time. I know in between country to country, it's huge to get you. And just want to wish you a very restful holiday, and hopefully you can just unwind with your family, and we'll see some pictures on LinkedIn of you just doing nothing and just, spending some quality time over the holiday.
Thanks, Nathan. Same to you. And if there's one message from when I finished writing the book and our daughter was just born, spoke to this veteran who was 105, actually 106 he turned. And just on that point, he was telling me a very dark story about his days during the Second World War. And I asked him, how did he maintain hope? And there was literally moments where he literally was surrounded by the enemy. And he turned to me, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, no, we kept saying to ourselves, we're not running away, we'll give it a go. We haven't got much, but we're not running away, we'll give it a go. And I just thought, wow, that 85 years ago he was saying that, and we have so much more at our disposal. So if he can give it a go, we can give it a go as well. And there's a lot we can do. And to finish with the great Jane Goodall, the late Jane Goodall, there is still so much in the world worth fighting for. So appreciate all you're doing, and it was a real pleasure to be on
Love that
today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mick. We'll talk to you soon.